I've been meditating and thinking about the gospel for about 3 weeks now, and 2 weeks ago I preached about sharing the gospel, and the thing is saying I'm not ashamed of the gospel. And so today I kind of want to pick up on that theme about the gospel. It's a phrase today that just kind of gets thrown around in a lot of Christian circles. But what does it actually mean? What does the gospel mean? Well, according to Paul in 1 Corinthians, he said that the gospel, or 2 Corinthians, I'm sorry, he said that the gospel is that Jesus died on the cross according to the Scriptures and was raised the third day according to the Scriptures. That was foretold. And Jesus himself foretold it along with the prophets. And so that's the gospel. But when Jesus came, he came preaching the gospel of the kingdom. And so there's much in what we call the four gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And it tells the story of Jesus on earth, of his arrival and his ascension, and all that he taught and all that he did, miracles and his lessons, and those are his teachings. That's the gospel according to Jesus Christ. It's his interpretation of the very fact of why he came and why he rose again. And so I want to return today to that passage of Scripture that I quoted a couple of weeks ago, Romans chapter 1, and we're just going to look at verses 16 and 17. The Bible says, and this is Paul speaking, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel, because it is God's power for salvation to everyone who believes." Say everyone.
Everyone.
Look at your neighbor and say, "That's you."
That's you.
And that's me. To everyone. First to the Jew and also to the Gentiles, the Greek. For in it, in verse 17 he says, "For in it," in the gospel, "it is God's righteousness that is revealed from faith to faith, just as it is written, the righteous will live by faith." And so Paul, here in these two short verses, presents a great summary of the gospel, and that's what I want to share with you today. He gives a clear declaration of God's power and God's purpose and God's plan in the gospel. Paul's statements about the gospel begin sort of in a strange fashion, because in verse 15 he says, "I am ready to preach the gospel to you who are in Rome." Now, and then he says, "I'm not ashamed." But the question is, why would anyone be ashamed of the gospel? It is, in its real meaning, the word gospel means good news. Why would anyone be ashamed of good news and the gospel of Jesus Christ? There are 4 reasons here. They're already on the screen, but we're just going to kind of pick through these quickly today as an introduction. First of all, the moral conditions of the day would have kept some, this is the day in which Paul was living, would have kept some from sharing the gospel. The world at that time, much like today, was a terrible place. And Rome was a cesspool. It was like a septic tank. Would have been his description of it. And the emperor of Rome was Nero. And Nero was a wicked and degenerate man. I mean, he just had degenerated down to the lowest moral condition. And so the people living in Rome were wicked, and they were diametrically opposed to what the gospel represented. And we've got a lot of people today that are like that. They want to do what they want to do. They want to divulge themselves in all manner of immorality, and just on and on we could go. And so they're opposed to the gospel. And those Jews living in that time, because it was so bad, could be tempted to be ashamed of the gospel. But Paul says, I am not ashamed in spite of these moral conditions. Secondly, Paul was a Jew, and Jews were despised. They were sort of thought of as subhumans. The only way I could liken that and think of that is really to go back into our history books to Nazism and the Holocaust of the Jewish people. They saw them as subhumans that had no value in society whatsoever. And so in Nazi, in Germany, they tried to annihilate them under Hitler's rule. But in Paul's day, it was much the same. Jews were the lowest taboo that you could ever be associated with. And so they were despised, they were mistreated, they were enslaved. And this gospel came out of the Jewish background. You do know that Jesus is a Jew. I mean, we think of Jesus as, here in our neck of the woods, as looking like us. You know, fair skin, and, the like. But Jesus was a Jewish man. He had a darkened skin, almost a brown skin, dark eyes, dark hair, dark eyebrows, a dark beard, and he spoke in a dialect that was commonly known as Arabic. Now, our scriptures are written, the New Testament's written in Greek. But often you'll see in the Gospels where there is an Arabic phrase, and they didn't translate it because it was so common. And so, some were ashamed because of the moral conditions. Some were ashamed because Paul was a Jew, and so he could have, kind of stepped back. Thirdly, because the message that Paul preached was almost beyond belief. It was nearly impossible to ever grasp. It couldn't be explained with science. It couldn't be explained in political terms. Even now, if I heard somebody the other day on radio, Christian radio, and they were talking about if Jesus, if the disciples had stolen his body, which is what some said, why would they have died for that lie? Plus the fact that the Roman guards were told, don't mention this and we'll pay you, we'll take care of you. You know, there was just all this stuff. But the message was almost beyond belief. In fact, Paul said in 1 Corinthians 1:18 that the word of God of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing. It doesn't make any sense. It's foolishness. And there are people today that still think what we do here in a worship service, the message that we share, is foolishness. Jesus died on the cross, and yet in dying that death, Jesus claimed to have died for lost sinners. And if that wasn't enough, on the third day He arose that we might have life, that we might be justified before a holy God. That means we could be accepted, not based on our own merit, but based on His merit, what He had done. And so the gospel's a difficult message. It's to a lost and prideful world. It's foolishness. And if you stand up for Jesus and you share the gospel, people will think you're foolish. But you know what? I'd rather be a fool for Jesus than deny Him. Because the Bible says in the book of Proverbs that the fool says in his heart, and then I take God at His word. And then the fourth reason that Paul could have been tempted to be ashamed of the gospel was that he was ridiculed everywhere he went for this message. Paul never had, everybody was like, oh yes, it's Paul. Every city he went in, he was ridiculed and imprisoned and treated cruelly. In Philippi, he was put in prison. In Thessalonica, he was chased out of town. In Berea, he was smuggled out of town in a basket. In Athens, he was mocked. In Corinth, he was called a fool. And in Galatia, he was stoned. So it would have been real easy for him to kind of tone down the message. Kind of not be so vocal about it. But here, Paul is talking to Roman citizens. And he said, I am ready to come and preach there also. And by the way, I'm not ashamed of the gospel. And then he tells us why. And that's what I really want to get to. What was it about the gospel that energized Paul and kept driving him to go to the known regions of the world, preaching a hated message? Well, first of all, the gospel is the power of God. That's the first thing we see. The gospel is God's power. That phrase, I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God. That word power means might, or energy, or force, or strength that dwells within God. You know what he's saying? That same might, that same energy, that same force, that same strength that God has, when you share the gospel, it has all that in it. And so Paul is encouraging us and encouraging the people in his day to not be ashamed, because you've got so much more with you than you have against you. And Paul's gospel is different from all other gospels. Even today, there's a social gospel. The social gospel is a gospel that says, we need to feed all the hungry, and we need to help all those in need, and those are all good. But friend, I want you to know, if you feed the starving and you don't give them the bread of life, they will perish. If you only seek a social gospel, and it's very easy to get caught up in that and lose sight of the need to share the gospel of Jesus Christ with them. So there's a social gospel. In Paul's day, there was a religious gospel. There was a religious gospel that says, turn over a new leaf. Follow these rules. You know what? If we're not careful today, we'll portray that to people. You see, it's not about them going to church and giving in tithe and doing all these things. Those are fruits of our righteousness. We do those because we do know the Lord. But that's not a requirement for salvation. So there's a religious gospel. There's a social gospel. There is a liberal gospel that basically says, you believe what you believe, and I'll believe what I believe, and we'll all get to heaven one day. Well, I addressed that a few weeks back. And that's simply not true. In fact, people deny that at the graveside of their loved ones. See, it requires something. There's a liberal gospel. There's all these modern gospels. There's a false gospel. And it is prevalent in our day. If you just believe this, and you claim this verse, and you speak it, then you're going to have it. That's not true. The Bible nowhere gives us that. And if you send your money to such and such place, and they're going to send you a little hanky back, and you'll be blessed, what you're going to be is lighter in your pocketbook. That's all that is. There's a lot of false gospels. Heard John MacArthur this week preaching about the false gospel. Whoa. God could have revealed His power against sin in any way He chose. You know, God could have wiped the sinful from the face of the earth. God could have sentenced you, and God could have sentenced me straight to hell. He had the power to do that. But He didn't reveal His power in that way. God exercised His power by sending His Son to a cross. And that through faith, by grace, we could be saved. And when God saves a lost sinner by His grace, He makes him a new creature. Friend, I want you to know that is powerful. That is a power that doesn't just sustain in this life, but it's a power for after the grave. You see, Paul's message says this, the gospel that he preached. You're a sinner, and if you die in your sins, you're going to go to hell. However, God loves you and sent His Son into this world to die on the cross for you. And if you'll place your faith in Him and what He's done, then you can and will be eternally saved. And I know a lot of people would say, yeah, I believe in Jesus, but they're still not sure that they can be saved, that they're going to get to heaven. Friend, stop looking at your own effort, because it's not of your own effort that you're saved. It is by grace, through faith. It is all of Jesus and none of you. The only thing you can do with the gospel is receive it. And when you receive it, you can be saved. So we see the power of the gospel. Let me quickly hurry. We see the purpose of the gospel. Why did God go to such great lengths? Salvation. I'm not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God unto salvation. Salvation means safety, preservation, deliverance, rescue from harm and danger. And Jesus has done all that for me. And that's why we should be able to stand up and give a testimony and say, yes, that happened to me. God's purpose of giving the gospel is to change our destination and our life here on earth. Let me move on. Notice also the plan of the gospel. God's plan for the gospel. To everyone who believes. Everyone. Not just the rich. Not just the talented. But everyone. And he says to the Jew first and also to the Greek. It wasn't because Jesus wanted the Jews first. It's just that they had been His people all throughout history. They were a chosen generation, chosen people to show forth His glory. And when they failed to do so, Jesus came to them. Well, let's read John 1:11. He came to His own, and His own people did not receive Him. But to all who did receive Him, He gave them the right to be the children of God, to those who believe in His name. So to the Jew first, also to the Gentile, the Greek, as it was in that day. And so we see the plan of the gospel. But let me quickly wrap this up with the product of the gospel. You see, God doesn't just save you for you to sit and wait on heaven. The Bible says, let's go back to our scripture, to verse 17, that very first slide on this, because I want to read it again. For in it God's righteousness is revealed from faith to faith, just as it is written, the righteous will live by faith. In the gospel, Jesus reveals God's righteousness, His holiness. And that righteousness comes from God, displayed in Jesus. And when we trust Jesus, by faith, it is received in our life. The Bible says that His righteousness, it uses a theological word, is imputed to us. That means it's applied to our account. His righteousness is applied to us. And so when we stand before God one day, and when we pray each day, it's not based on our own righteousness. It's based on His righteousness. Now, I don't know about you, that ought to make a Baptist shout today. I'm telling you, because Jesus doesn't receive me because I've been good. Because I want you to know I'm a stinking, rotten sinner.
Amen.
Thank you, sister. All the bad that I ever had in me, I could still do those things. He didn't somehow just take all that away. And sometimes I act in ways that aren't very Christian-like. God's righteousness is revealed by faith. And the righteous live by faith. What that means is, the faith that saves us in the beginning leads us to an ending faith. See, I started with Jesus, but I want you to know I'm going to wind up with Jesus.
Amen.
By faith. And when I get to heaven, it will be by faith. The just, the most quoted verse in the Scripture. I forgot how many times it's in there. The just will live by faith. Abraham lived by faith. David lived by faith. We are called to live by faith. That is the product of the gospel. It's made known in our lives. And you and I have been given a gospel that's worth believing and worth sharing. Brother Mike, if you'll come, we're going to sing Jesus Paid It All. And I want to ask you as we get ready to do that, are you trusting in the gospel of Christ for salvation? Or are you putting your hope in something else? If your hope is in something else today, you know what? God wants to save you. He wants to change your heart right now. In fact, pray this prayer with me. Say, dear Jesus, I've tried everything on my own, but I still don't have peace. God, I want to trust you totally and completely in spite of the bad things I've done and in spite of the things I might do. I believe your cross, your blood, covers it all. And Lord, that doesn't give me a license to sin. It doesn't give me a blank check to sin. But God, when I do, when I fail, I believe what you've done is sufficient. I want you to come into my life right now because I'm a sinner and I need you. And I believe you are the sinless Son of God who died for me. Thank you for saving me, Jesus. In His name. Amen. You prayed that prayer, I want you to know you just got saved. And if you meant that with your heart, I want you to know no devil of hell, nothing can ever take that away from you. It's yours for time and eternity.